Okay. Thank
Hi.
you, Steve. And thank you, Summer. Hi, everybody. I'm Derek. I'm a real recovered alcoholic. And I say a real alcoholic because I suffered at an extreme level from this hopeless condition of mind and body. And I don't have that issue anymore. I have a thinking issue that's continuously improving, that goes up and down. But we're in a bull market, thank God. um, So I think more than anything else, step three is a very, very misunderstood step, or as are a lot of them. And I can't speak on step three without speaking on steps one and two, because it's vitally important to understand the basis of step one and two before you really, really can grasp what step three is really about. So the first thing to understand is when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I came into Alcoholics Anonymous on October 13th of 1980, which is, oh, by the way, happy birthday, AA. This is the 87th anniversary of Alcoholics Anonymous today, June 10th. This is when Dr. Bob met Bill. Dr. Bob didn't stay sober, though. He took a trip over to a surgeon's conference on the East Coast and came back a few weeks later. But today is the date of the anniversary, June 10th, 1935. So that's 87 years, I believe. So thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bob, because we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had no idea. I'd never even heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, how I came in was being Irish. I was born in Dublin, in Ireland, and I was sitting in Muldoon's Irish pub in Newport Beach in California in my usual corner, drinking my whiskey, feeling very important. I'm 6'1". I weighed 140 pounds. That was with my hairpiece at the time that looked like a bird's nest on my head. And I tried to pick up a girl who I had dated before, which was very embarrassing. And I said to her, Jeannie, what happened to you? And she said, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went into the care unit in South Coast Medical Center in Laguna Beach. She said, maybe you ought to try it too. And that stayed in my head. And that's how I arrived in. And I had no idea about Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know anything about the steps or anything else like that. And I stayed without a drink for about 3 years until I was on a business trip up to Cape Cod 3 years later. And I was sitting in Boston Airport waiting for a small plane to take me over to Cape Cod. And I remember having a couple of soda waters or Perrier's or whatever the hell it was. And the next thing I knew, I was drinking a vodka and tonic. And I do not remember even ordering it. I was to discover later on in the book where it talks about the strange mental blank spot that precedes the first drink. I had a couple more after that and plenty more on the way back. And I went back to my meetings. Now, the problem with Alcoholics Anonymous today, I don't say problem, but the issue is depending on where you land. There's a great example of the four progressive types of alcoholism in I think it's the chapter to the wives or the employers. And there's four distinct phases. You know, when you come in, you can be slightly alcoholic in the beginning, and it progresses into their alcoholic number 3 and alcoholic number 4. And I don't know where I was in that scale. And depending on where you land, you may land in an area where it's just don't drink and go to meetings, or you may land in it where we're really practicing the program and the steps are really being emphasized. So unfortunately, where I landed was not where the steps were being emphasized. In fact, the first sponsor I had said, don't worry about the steps for your first year, just focus on staying sober. You know, and I was to discover later on that real sobriety rests on spiritual growth, and spiritual growth does not rest on sobriety. It's you get the first or you won't get the second. And I drank again as a result of that. It was 3 years later. And then the program I was working, basically, which was going to meetings and not drinking, I'd work the steps after some sort of fashion, but not to the depth that I later found necessary. And as a result, it wasn't until 1991, October 7th of 1991, that I finally managed to understand what was going on with me. So that's just a little preamble of my own experience, but let me address the issues of the steps. In the foreword to the first edition, it says, "We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body." I did not understand what that hopeless state of mind and body was. The first thing I did understand was the phenomena of craving. I knew when I picked up a drink, I had little or no control over that drink. I couldn't predict what might happen or what might occur. But I had no idea that I was powerless over the first drink. I thought that was a choice. And I thought if I exercised diligence over, going to meetings, all of that type of stuff, and avoided the first drink, well, then I wouldn't get drunk. And I suffered from the illusion that I could control that first drink by not drinking a day at a time, forgetting that there were many days when I woke up in my drunken state or in semi-sober state in the past when I said, I'm not going to drink today. And by 10 o'clock, I'd be drinking again, or by 11 o'clock, I'd be drinking again. So my desire, the requirements for membership in AA is a desire to stop drinking. That you don't have to be an alcoholic, you just have a desire to stop drinking. My desire to stop drinking had no relationship to my illness whatsoever. It did not affect it one way or the other. My illness did not care whether I had the desire to stop drinking or not. It simply progressed. So what is the hopeless condition of mind? Why is it over and over and over again that I would pick up that first drink after any period of sobriety? Through those years from 1983 until 1991, I became one of those 30, 60, 90-day guys. I'd get 30 days, I'd get 60 days. I might get 90 days, and then I'd drink again. And I didn't know why I was doing that. And this was compounded because I started to feel guilty about it. And there was nobody in the group I was with at the time that had any solution. They'd say, well, nobody held you down and poured it down your throat, Nobody said you're the hopeless condition of mind. So I really didn't know. And I'd read this book, but I couldn't seem to extract that information. When I really ran into somebody who finally opened my eyes to what was occurring, I realized that the hopeless condition of mind was I was being condemned to drink against my will, and I didn't know it. And the definition of the obsession that I've come up with that seems to fit this is a recurring, persistent idea that is more powerful and does not respond to reason or to reasons. Just doesn't respond. There was no logical thinking mechanism that was at work that seemed to prevent me from picking up something that was literally poison to my system. I knew what the consequences would be, but I was unable to seemingly not do it. There was a threadbare idea that came in, and it's talked about in the book, but I couldn't seem to do anything about it. And once I started, I had no control over the amount I take. So there we have the hopeless condition of mind and the hopeless condition of body. And that's talked about also on page 30 of our big book in More About Alcoholism. It says, most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Bodily different is the phenomenon of craving. Mentally different is the obsession of the mind. So we have it on page 30. We have the introduction of it. It's talked to again on page 44 in the chapters of the agnostic. Page 43, More About Alcoholism. At the end of that particular chapter is the end of any real references to drinking. And it talks about it. It says, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. And they explain in that section also the different types of hard drinkers. They talk about, for example, on page 20, they talk about the moderate drinker, the certain type of hard drinker, and the real alcoholic. For those of you who don't know what a moderate drinker is, Moderate drinkers are drinkers that do things like this. They have one of these drinks filled with umbrellas and cream and fruit and God knows what. And they do things like that while they're talking to you. And they keep doing that. And you want to say, well, you drink the damn thing, you know? And they don't. And then they leave half of it. I doubt if anybody's in that category. And then it says we have a certain type of hard drinker. She may have the habit gradually, badly enough to gradually impair her physically and mentally. It may cause her to die a few years before her time. If a sufficiently strong reason, here's the reason: ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor become operative, this woman can also stop or moderate, although she may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So here's the woman or man who can wind up in AA, but she's not a real alcoholic. She's a moderate, certain kind of hard drinker because she can stop for a reason, or he can stop for a reason, or moderate. That was not possible for me. I'm a real alcoholic. And then the next sentence goes, but what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker, may or may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. So here I was, condemned to drink against my will, and a bodily sensitivity which guaranteed early insanity at best, because I had that abnormal reaction. The more I drank, the more I wanted to drink. And a normal person, the more they drink, the less they want to drink. So if you're condemned to drink against your will, and that's what a real alcoholic really is. And remember, this is a progressive illness. You may come in the early stages and not be condemned to drink against your will. You may still have some willpower left, so to speak. But if you're into that category, and once you start, and you can't not start, then you're going to suffer from the phenomenon of craving, because enough is never enough. And that's why on page 44, they ask us only 2 questions. And I'm not a real alcoholic because I had, 5 DUIs, or I went to jail for having this or that, or I wrecked so many cars, or any of that situation. That does not make me a real alcoholic. There's 2 questions I need to ask myself. And it says, in the preceding chapters, we have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the real alcoholic. And then it asks the question, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. So here I am, sober for dry for a period of months. I honestly want to stop, but I find I can't quit entirely. In other words, I'm picking up another drink again. I don't want to do that. Or if when drinking, once I start, you have little or no control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. And then it gives us the solution. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. And that's synthesized then, goes on to the chapters of the agnostic, which explains to us what step 2 is about. But on page 60, it says a description of the alcoholic. That's given in the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, more about alcohol, or there is a solution, more about alcoholism. The chapters of the agnostic, chapter 4, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas, and here they are. That we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. That's step 1. B is also step 1, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. That's what we just read. That may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. And C, that God could and would if he were saw. That's coming to believe. That is step 2. Now, it says, being convinced of that, we're at step 3. And in the original manuscript, Bill had written here, if you're not convinced on these vital issues, in other words, if you're not convinced you're drinking against your will, if you're not convinced that once you start, you've little or no control, if you haven't yet become convinced that only a spiritual experience can solve your problem, then the best thing you can do is reread the book to this point or else throw it away. So it's vital to get convinced. And I find in AA land today, that the vast majority of the membership of alcoholics, for the most part, has not taken step one. If you've admitted you're powerless over alcohol, if you've really admitted that, and yet you're practicing some program where you say, I just don't drink a day at a time, where is the power coming from? Who's supplying it? You or God? Step one is not about you deciding you can do anything about your drinking. It's deciding there's nothing you can do about your drinking and turning it over to God. That's what step one is, the admission of complete defeat. I give up. There's nothing I can do anymore. And trying to stay sober a day at a time, a week at a time, a month at a time, are all relying on your human resources. So it's vitally important you be convinced of these factors before you can possibly take step three, because otherwise you won't see the necessity for taking step three. After all, if you can stay sober on your own power, why would you need a power greater than human power? That makes sense? See, and that finally began to lock into me what the real issue and what the real problem was. And so it says, being convinced we're at step three, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? It asks the question. And then it tells us an amazing thing. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So what these steps were designed to do was to bring us into an awareness of a power greater than ourselves. It was dear divine something. And for me, I saw that the issue in my life was somebody was always telling me what God was and who God was and everything else like that. I came to believe there was something in the universe. I saw it by the order in the universe. I saw it by the demonstration of that order. And I needed to get in touch with that. And I hoped like hell something was there. And it seemed to me it was impossible to explain this creation without it. So I came to believe. Then I made a decision. So step three is a decision. And there are a number of promises that will happen when you really have come to believe. And they're listed, there's about 14 of them. And they're the promises of the first two steps. And when these really start to happen in your life, and by the way, what was vitally important for me was as I went through the book to this point, it was vitally important that I took someone else through the book to this point, wherever I was at. If I had just gone through the doctor's opinion, it was vital that I took somebody else through the doctor's opinion. You're not teaching because you know something, you're teaching to learn. And I've never yet seen anybody really work a third or fourth step unless they'd help somebody towards the point that they were at and continue to do so. That's vitally important. So here are the promises of the first two steps. It says, when we sincerely took such a position, what position? This is the position now where we're going to make the decision to rely on God. All sorts of remarkable things followed. And remarkable things are things that you're going to remark on. Wow, that's remarkable. You know, we had a new employer, and that's God. Being all powerful, He provided what we needed if we kept close to Him, performed His work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, less and less interested in our little plans, less and less interested in our little designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of His presence. And at this point, the invisible started to demonstrate itself in some strange, tangible way to me, not in any apparitions or appearances or whatever, but the belief became transcended by, while I hoped there was something beginning, then I believed there was something, then I began to sense a knowing of a presence in my life. And there was a new power that was flowing in. I could feel it. I could sense it. It says we became conscious of His presence. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, the hereafter. We were reborn. We're reborn into that new consciousness that we become just vaguely conscious of, that transcends the egoic ego brain mind. And now we're ready to make this decision. Now, people often think that they're turning their will and their life over to the care of God in step three. They're not doing that in step three. They're making a decision to do that. And you will have achieved that objective when you work steps 4 through 9. And the promises of step 9 are the promises If you will, in the East, they call it self-realization. I like that term. I'm a practitioner of yogi, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But it is the dawning of the real awareness of a conscious contact with the presence and the development of what we call the sixth sense. We have only 5 senses in this three-dimensional world: hearing, smell, taste, touch, and sight. The vital sixth sense, the intuitive sense, is the ability to communicate with the invisible and to receive direction and answers from questions back and forth. And that develops as we go forward. It's still developing in my own life. So we take a step here, and what's being asked of us here is to commit ourselves in service to God. And that's it, period. It's not about committing ourselves to stay sober, because sobriety rests on our relationship with God, nothing else. So this commitment is a life devoted to God in service. And it's very clearly mentioned on page 77, I believe. Let's see here. Yeah, on page 77, AA has a purpose, a function, and a code. I never knew that. And it says on page 77, 3 lines down, our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And step 3 is our decision to do just that. And in order to achieve that, we have to remove from ourselves those things that are blocking us from that relationship with the divine, which is deep down within, as Bill said. We found the great reality deep down within. And that again is talked about. It says it's only there that it may be found. Only means nowhere else. So that's our purpose. Our function is on page 85, and it's to grow in effectiveness and understanding. And our code is also on page 85, and it's love and tolerance of others is our code. So that's the function, the purpose, and the code. So we're not just making a decision here to quit drinking or anything else like that. We are making a commitment to devote ourselves to the service to God. And it is the self that's in the problem. If we look at the wording, it says, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do it with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of cocaine, alcohol, sex. No, relieve me of the bondage of self. Self being the ego brain mind with all its ideas and all its scheming and all its everything else like that. And so in simple terms, we're getting rid of what we're not, and we're waking up to what we've always been within ourselves. We're getting rid of what we're not, and we're waking up to what we've always been. So step 3 is the turning over of ourselves to this power, and the decision to turn this over, and the decision to work steps 4 through 9 to come into this deep, deep awareness. And that's why it says, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action. And when you launch a ship, you know, it doesn't take forever to go down the gangplank. It just, boom, you're into the ocean. So the most important thing about step 3 is the understanding of the 2 preceding steps. The hopelessness of our condition, that only a power greater than human power can solve it for us. And if you're in the early stages, you may be able to stop drinking for a period of time or whatever. You may even be able to stop drinking for a considerable period of time. But the happiness and joy that comes from this contact is immensely more, because our real problem is with our thinking. And we must let go of all our old ideas, and we don't have the power to do that. We can only be able to do that by the working of the steps. So step 3, once more, is a decision to work the rest of the steps and to come into the awareness of this presence. And that's made very clear on page 64. And it said, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, that's step 3, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom. We had to get down to causes and conditions. Now, There are two things existing. When you have a symptom is always a symptomatic situation of a problem. See? So liquor is just the symptom, but it isn't the problem. The thinking is the problem. And what we're doing is drinking to address the thinking. And we're trying to shut this off with all of the stuff that's going on. And the stuff that's really going on has to exist. Like everybody's crazy when they're drunk. So if you really want to understand alcoholism, you have to take a look at it when you're not drinking. And that again is listed on page 52. And there are 7 symptoms of alcoholism. So if you go to the doctor and he diagnoses an illness is recognized by, is diagnosed by its characteristic symptoms. So if it's winter, we go in somewhere and, you've got red eyes and nose and coughing and sneezing. It's pretty evident that you've got a cold or something like that. So the doctor can diagnose the illness by the characteristic symptoms. You can also diagnose alcoholism by its characteristic symptoms. But in order to diagnose it, you have to really take a look at it to see the unmanageability of life when the person isn't drinking. So this is what's going on. We were having trouble with our personal relationships. Number 1, we couldn't control our emotional natures. Number 2, we were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. Number 4, we were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. I had a sponsor at the time who said to me, Derek, make a list of all people you've been of help to. It shouldn't take you long. And he was right. That's the stuff that's going on. And that's why we drink, to shut that off. So finally, when I began to see what was being asked of me, and I recognized my problem and what alcoholism truly was, one, an unmanageable life, all generated from my thinking. These old ideas had to go. And so the steps are a precise, step-by-step, stage-by-stage method to dropping this consciousness of all of this ego, brain, mind nonsense and crap that's in there, and getting in touch with a higher mind that's within us, if you will, our spirit, which is connected to divine mind. And so as we go on and makes a vacuum and space in this, you get a flow of this energy down into your own consciousness, and you become an instrument of your own higher will. It's pretty awesome. It's just an amazing situation. So that's step 3. And it really doesn't matter what the words are, but I don't think I could improve on something that's so well written. So with that, I don't think there's too much more I can say about it. Again, just in recapping it, it's vitally important to understand what we're suffering from. It's vitally important to understand alcoholism, its true nature. It's vitally important once you realize you're beyond human aid, that you're hopeless, that there's no way out of this. If it's a hopeless condition of mind, there's no psychiatrist going to be able to help you. If it's a hopeless condition of body, there's no doctor going to be able to help you. We need the master surgeon. And that's God. That's that divine power that lies latent within all of us, that we have to access. Bill called it the great reality deep down within. And we can access this by, first of all, coming to believe there's something there. Making a decision then to go and find it would be the next logical step. I mean, if you've accepted you're totally hopeless beyond human aid, and you've come to believe there is something, wouldn't it be insane not to go and find it? And so the steps are designed to do just that. So with that, I'll close it and open it up for questions or discussion or whatever the format is. Thank you all for allowing me to be of service today. Appreciate it. Thank you.